Living with my family has never been easy, but recently, things have gotten worse. My sister, who has always been a difficult person to deal with, told me to harm myself one day. She said it so casually, like she was telling me to grab her a drink or turn off a light. What made it worse was that my mom was right there, and instead of stopping her or telling her how wrong she was, she just encouraged her. She even laughed along, as if it was some sort of twisted joke. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I decided that I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I knew I had to get out of there, even if it meant sneaking away silently. So one night, I packed a few things, trying to be as quiet as possible. I thought I could slip out without anyone noticing. But just as I was tiptoeing towards the door, my mom caught me. Her expression changed instantly. She went from looking bored to furious. She blocked the door and did everything she could to keep me from leaving. She grabbed my arm, shouted at me, and even threatened to call the police if I tried to step outside. I felt trapped, like a prisoner in my own home. A few weeks later, I worked up the courage to tell my mom that I planned to move out for college. I thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd understand that I needed space to grow and focus on my future. But instead, she reacted like I'd just shattered her whole world. She started crying hysterically, loud, painful sobs that echoed through the house. She kept screaming over and over that I didn't love her, that I was abandoning her, and that I'd never appreciated everything she'd done for me. It was like she wanted to break me down with her tears, to make me feel guilty for wanting a better life. My sister heard the commotion and walked into the room, looking curious. When she asked my mom what had happened, my mom pointed at me and screamed that I didn't love her anymore, that I was selfishly leaving her behind. My sister's face twisted into a scowl, and without any warning or provocation, she pulled out her phone and sent me a direct message that left me shattered. In that message, she called me horrible names and said things I never thought I'd hear from a family member. She told me that I was trash, that no one loved me, and that no one ever would. She even made cruel references to painful experiences from my past, like when my boyfriend broke up with me last year. She claimed that it was proof that I was unlovable and unwanted. Worst of all, she told me to end my life, saying that no one would care if I did. She even threw in a few threats, mentioning how I used to call the police on my mom when things got really bad when we were kids. It was like she was trying to rewrite history, blaming me for everything. Reading her words felt like being stabbed in the heart. I couldn't stop the tears from falling as I read her hateful messages over and over. But instead of comforting me, my mom walked in and saw me crying, and she started laughing. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was a loud, mean laugh that made my whole body go cold. She looked at my sister and said she was hilarious, as if my pain was some kind of inside joke between them. Then, she turned to me with a sneer and said, "You're going nowhere," before walking away. I stood there, feeling like my whole world was collapsing around me. All I wanted was to get away, to escape to a place where I could feel safe and start over. But I didn't even know where to go. I tried to calm down, to think about my next step, but my mind was racing, and I couldn't focus. My sister came back into the room a few minutes later, still wearing that smug look on her face. She stood in front of me, arms crossed, like she was waiting for me to break down again. Her voice was dripping with fake concern as she asked, "What's wrong? Did I hurt your feelings?" She didn't even wait for me to respond. "Oh wait, I forgot. You don't have any feelings, do you? You're just an empty shell who thinks the world owes her something." She smirked, like she was enjoying every second of my misery. I wanted to yell at her, to scream that she was wrong, that she didn't know anything about me. But I couldn't trust myself to speak. I knew that if I opened my mouth, I would either burst into tears or start shouting, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. So, I stayed silent, clenching my fists, trying to keep it together. She leaned in closer until her face was just inches from mine, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're such a pathetic little crybaby. No wonder no one wants you around," she said. Then she moved behind me, and before I could react, she flicked the back of my head with her fingers. The sting made me stumble forward, and she laughed again, a harsh, mocking sound. "Oops," she said with a fake sweetness. "Didn't see you standing there." I just stood there, frozen, trying not to let her words get to me. But inside, I felt like I was being crushed. I felt trapped, like I couldn't even breathe properly. My chest was tight, and my head was throbbing where she'd flicked it. But that pain was nothing compared to the heaviness I felt inside. She leaned in again, her breath hot against my ear, and whispered, "You know, you really should just disappear. You'd be doing us all a huge favor." She pulled back, laughing that same cold laugh, before turning and walking away, leaving me standing there, shaking with frustration and fear. After she left, I closed my eyes and wished I could disappear, wished I could be anywhere but there. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. When I finally managed to move, I went back to my room and locked the door. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer, but I also knew I couldn't just walk out the front door. My mom and sister would stop me for sure. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the blank wall in front of me, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I needed a plan, something solid. First, I grabbed my phone and opened the messages from my sister. I took screenshots of everything she had sent me. I didn't know if I would need them, but I wanted proof just in case things got worse. It felt strange, like I was building a case against my own family, but they had left me with no choice. After saving the screenshots in a hidden folder, I backed them up to my email. Then, I went through other old messages from my sister messages that were full of insults and threats from over the years. There were so many that it felt overwhelming, but I saved them too. I tried not to read them too closely because I knew they would just make me cry again, and I needed to stay focused. Next, I made a list of things I needed to take with me: clothes, my laptop, a few books that meant a lot to me, and some cash I'd been saving up from my part-time jobs. It wasn't much, just about $300, but I hoped it would be enough to get me started somewhere else. I started packing a small bag, rolling up my clothes and trying to keep everything quiet so that no one would hear me. As I was zipping up the bag, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. My heart jumped into my throat, and I froze, hoping that maybe they would just walk past my door. But then I heard the doorknob rattle, and I realized I'd forgotten to unlock it after my sister left. My mom's voice came through, sharp and annoyed. "Open the door." I hesitated for a moment, then forced myself to get up and unlock the door. She pushed it open and stood there, arms crossed, glaring at me. Her eyes darted to the bag on my bed, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I tried to stay calm, even though I could feel the panic rising inside me. "I'm just packing some stuff for college," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I just wanted to be ready." "Don't lie to me," she snapped, stepping into the room. "You think you're leaving? After everything I've done for you, you're just going to walk out?" I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and tried to force a smile. "I'm not trying to leave right now," I said, trying to sound convincing. "I was just getting things together. I'm not going anywhere." But I could see she didn't believe me. She took another step closer, her face inches from mine, her voice low and menacing. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you're going to run off and have this perfect little life? Well, you're not. You're not going anywhere. I know, Mom, I said, keeping my voice soft, even though it felt like my chest was about to explode. I know. I'm staying here. I'm sorry. I hated saying it. I hated pretending like I wanted to stay. But I knew that if I didn't, she would never let me leave. She stared at me for a long moment, as if she was searching my face for any sign that I was lying. Finally, she seemed to decide that I wasn't, and she stepped back, giving me one last glare. Good. You belong here with your family, she said coldly, before turning and walking out of my room. As soon as she was gone, I collapsed onto my bed, trying to hold back the tears. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. I just had to find a way to get out without them stopping me. Quietly, she gave me one last glare before turning and leaving the room, slamming the door behind her. I let out a shaky breath, feeling like I had just run a marathon. My hands trembled as I finished packing, stuffing a few more items into my bag. I wasn't going to let her win. I refused to stay here and allow them to destroy me. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I had to get out of this house. Even if it meant sneaking out in the middle of the night, I was going to leave. I was determined not to let them break me anymore. I was escaping this house, and I didn't care what I had to do to make it happen. Something I should also mention is that I had been able to secretly contact an acquaintance of mine. I confided in her about my family situation, and she, along with her family, knew my mom. They told me they would be willing to take me in if I made my way down to them, and promised not to tell anyone where I was staying. That's where I was headed. My hands were shaking, but I was on my way to a domestic violence shelter. Fear gripped my heart. The family who was going to take me in warned me that my mom was too scary when she was mad. If she found out where I was, they were afraid she would do something drastic to them. They didn't want to take that risk, which left me feeling abandoned and frustrated. I was upset with them about this. She didn't even have to know I was there. How could she have found out? They lived miles away. Right now, I looked like a mess, and it was all because everything had happened so fast. The night I left, my mom saw me walking out the door. A vase was thrown at me, and she hurled the most hurtful things imaginable. My life was threatened by her, and I didn't even have time to shower or change clothes. I looked and smelled awful, but I had to escape. I made it to the to get my medicine. Thankfully, the domestic violence shelter was paying for it. I was afraid of being judged because I had literally rolled out of bed looking disheveled and unkempt. But I had to escape. The shelter itself was surprisingly nice. It felt amazing not to be yelled at or live in constant fear for my life when I went to sleep at night. The only downside was that they only gave me 30 days before I had to leave. Luckily, I had a job interview lined up, and I hoped it would lead to some stability. The interview was at a cinema, which would be a nice change of pace. I felt like it could be a good fit for me. To my surprise, my friend and her parents changed their minds too. They said I could stay there if I didn't have anywhere else to go after the 30 days, but I would need to buy my ticket. Wow, it's been nearly 3 years since I posted about my desperate need for help. For some reason, those posts popped into my head after all this time, and rereading them brought a flood of emotions. I want to hug my former self because I had forgotten how bad things were. I also want to embrace all of you who offered support. Your kindness helped me more than you know. I wrote down the advice you gave me, and I truly used it. So here's the final update to this saga, and it's a happy one. The shelter I stayed in was very nice and brand new. The staff explained how cramped the other shelters could be, so I felt incredibly lucky to have arrived when I did. After my first day, my nerves began to relax, and I could finally breathe. There were about 7 other women there, and we each had our own room with a private bathroom. I was the youngest there, and the other women shared life advice with me. They even did my makeup for interviews, which made me feel special. We each took turns cooking, which was a rule, and we developed a nice rapport. The staff was amazing and engaged with us on a personal level, offering advice and support. I felt so safe at this place because of the security measures in place. I almost forgot to mention a church group came by to give us quilts they had made. I still have mine, and sometimes I snuggle with it, thinking of how far I've come. I love that quilt and wash it very carefully. We also had group and individual therapy, which really helped me process my emotions. I know that every domestic violence shelter experience isn't like this one, but please, don't be afraid to leave when things get bad. Family abuse counts as domestic violence. I was able to find a job that paid more than what the movie theater had offered. I told the interviewer that I didn't plan on returning to school in the future. Yes, that was a lie, but there was no way I could afford rent while working at a movie theater. I decided to look for my own place instead of just staying with the friend who had offered, because I needed stability. After leaving such a toxic environment, I wanted to ensure that I had a support network. I had no reason to believe things would go bad, but the aftermath of my previous experiences left me feeling insecure. I rented a room, and my roommate was never home because he was a truck driver. Although I felt uneasy staying with an older man I didn't know, I had very few options. To my relief, he turned out to be really nice. Our schedules never aligned, so we left each other goodbye notes instead of chatting in person. I still have one of his notes as a reminder of that time in my life. Once my medical leave was over, I decided to go back to school the following semester, but not at my original school. I felt like I needed a fresh start, and my family already knew about my previous institution. So I applied to a different school, and I was thrilled when I got accepted. I shared my story in my application essay, detailing everything I had survived. When my sister told me I wasn't going to amount to anything, she was wrong, and I think deep down, she knew it too. I graduated this year, and for the first time, I felt a sense of stability I had never known before. Although I graduated a few years later than I initially hoped, I realized that it didn't matter. The time I took for myself was beneficial. I just got engaged to a lovely man who has an equally lovely family. They always tell me they're my family now, and I've grown particularly close with my future mother-in-law. Recently, I experienced food poisoning for the first time. It was a nightmare. My fiance woke up at 2 o'clock to get Pedialyte just to ensure I was hydrated. When I was stuck in the bathroom, he even offered to make lentil soup for me. This kind of care was so foreign to me. Growing up, when I was sick and vomiting, my mom would tell me to go back to sleep. It feels wonderful to be treated with such kindness and consideration. Sometimes I catch myself saying, "You don't have to," when he tries to do something nice for me, but I'm learning to accept love. My fiance has 6 siblings, and they are like the siblings I never had. In my journey toward healing, I've learned to value myself and put my needs first. Since I wasn't loved the way I should have been as a child, I now make it a point to do things for myself that I didn't receive growing up. I started buying myself flowers weekly. A therapist recommended this to me, and it has made a huge difference. I remind myself to care for my health and ensure I rest without disruptions when I'm feeling unwell. I learned the hard way that no one valued my personal time or space, so I intentionally set aside days where I don't answer my phone and just spend time with myself. When I made that last update, I was crying and felt hopeless. I was at a shelter with only 30 days left, and I thought there was no way anything beneficial could come from such a short stay. I was depressed and didn't believe anything positive would come from my situation. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I went from living in a toxic environment, filled with fear and insecurity, to finding my strength and creating a life for myself. I never imagined that my life could turn around so positively, and yet, here I am, reflecting on my journey and feeling grateful for the growth I've experienced. Every step I took, every moment of fear, every struggle, and every small victory led me to this moment. I can finally embrace the future with hope and excitement, knowing that I have the power to shape my life and create a loving and supportive environment. To anyone reading this who may be in a similar situation, I want to tell you, you are not alone. There is hope, and there is help available. Don't be afraid to reach out and take that first step toward freedom and healing. You deserve to live a life free from fear and full of love. Thank you for being part of my journey. Your support means the world to me, and I'm excited to see what the future holds.